Hey, what's going on, Mission Hills? We're so excited to have you guys back for the continuing of the conversation. It has been just a minute for Craig and I. Probably been a month with some, give and take. I think the last one was was a little bit before Mother's Day, but we're back on the continuing.
Oh, right, because JG hosted.
JG came in, Kelly and Abby came in. We missed one. You and I were on vacation, and now we're back. And I think this is a little bit of a preview because I think I'm out next week too.
Oh yeah, I'm not out next week, so I will be here.
Well, we are super excited to have you guys. We have kicked off a new sermon series this week, and if you guys have not listened, we would highly recommend you go and you help us kick off the first week of the Legacy Lent.
And it was Memorial Day, so
yes.
I know a lot of you missed actually.
It was, it was a little rainy, but I'm sure everybody was out and enjoying the Colorado weather as best as they could have. I know I had some friends that ran the Boulder, and it looked rainy, but it also looked awesome.
Yeah, this is totally random, but I was actually curious. Like, it's Memorial Day, so people are out, but it's raining, so maybe people aren't out as much. But actually, yeah. So just I can tell you behind the scenes because I'm a numbers guy. Like, we typically see about a 25% drop on Memorial Day weekend, and we did. We were bigger this Memorial Day than last Memorial Day because there's been growth. But it was about the same percentage drop, even though it was rainy. So yeah, so a lot of people probably did not hear the message. Although maybe we'll see the online numbers tick up a little bit, but probably not.
Well, this is a good reminder. Then why don't you guys go ahead and head back and listen to that? It was a great message this weekend with Craig as we kicked it off, and I was super interested in this sermon series because I think this is something that we focus on as Christians, but maybe the general population doesn't kind of keep this at the forefront of their mind, especially with today's influencers, and you're seeing all of this hardcore achieve your goal type of a measurement success type of a thing being pushed in today's society, where it's all about the people you love, not kind of what you're currently accomplishing. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the genesis of that idea here and why you thought that was important, kind of specifically here as we come out of Easter too.
Yeah. Well, and I think you were in on the original planning on this, right? We were having this conversation. I felt like God had laid it on my heart to do a relationship series. And I wasn't sure exactly what that was going to look like, but I think I was using the word legacy. So I usually plan the sermon series 6 months to a year out or so. And so at least 6 months ago, probably more than that, I had sat down and just really felt like, something about legacy was on my heart. And legacy is about relationships. And so we were having that conversation, and I don't know where it came up. It might have been an AI actually that spit out one of the possible phrases, which is, it's not something you leave, it's someone you love. And I remember I heard that and I was like, okay, that's it. That's the heart of this. Because it is so tempting to think about the legacy that we're leaving in terms of things that really don't have anything to do with people. It's the money I made, it's the career that I had, it's the title that I earned, it's those kinds of things. That's so easy we think of as our legacy, but realizing that at the end of the day, as we said this past weekend, all that matters is God and people. Accomplishments are forgotten, relationships are forever. This idea that in that tagline, it's not something you leave, it's someone you love. That's the heart of the series.
It's as you've always said, right? It's all about God and people.
Yes. Well, as
I think we're on the third time
at this
now.
point now, as you've heard me say it.
Okay, that's where we're at.
You've heard me say it. Next time it will be as you always hear me say.
But I think it's really counter. I think it was super popular in the 90s. He who dies with the most stuff wins.
Yeah.
It was super popular for a long time. So I love our perspective as Christians. I remember in the planning process for this, you and I were talking about this. I love movies. Our producer, Zach, here behind the camera, also loves movies. And I was reminded of a quote in Interstellar, Christopher Nolan film, where Matt Damon is talking to Matthew McConaughey when they're on this other planet and they're talking about saving the species, and he has a quote and he says, we are able to care deeply about the people around us and the people that we have spent time with, but rarely does that extend past our line of vision out to the general population. Yeah. I think that is one of the cool defining characteristics of us as Christians, is that separates us because we are called to be kingdom-minded and see outside of ourselves towards that kind of Christ population. Yeah. And so I thought that was such a cool way of looking at something very countercultural right now.
Yeah, it's countercultural. And one of the things I wonder about, Colin, is how much of it has to do with the age group that is driving the culture. And what I mean by that is, I mentioned this a little bit in the message this weekend, if you had asked me the question, what do you want your legacy to be 20, 30 years ago, I would not have said what I said this weekend. Like what I said this weekend was I find myself more and more going, I want to be remembered as kind. But what happened to me, because that's not what I thought when I was 20 or 30. And I wonder if some of it is generational, and not generation in the sense of Gen X, Gen Z, that kind of stuff, but like what generation is driving the culture. I think the younger you are, the more inclined maybe naturally you are to think that it's about accomplishments. Mm-hmm. And then as you get older, it's probably less about accomplishments. I'm finding that in my own soul, that it's less about accomplishments, which is an interesting thing because in some ways I've accomplished more than I ever thought that I would. Right? I mean, like I never thought, when I was 20, I never thought I'd end up with a PhD in biblical studies. I never thought that I would be writing books. I certainly never thought I'd be leading one of those mega church kinds of things where I'm impacting thousands of people every single week. But even though I've accomplished those things, those aren't the things that I'm looking back on going, I made it, I did it. It really is much more about relationships. And that's not because I have ticked off the boxes, because honestly, I have desire for accomplishments. I still think about books that I want to write. I mean, just between us, like I've sort of like had some experience now leading a mega church. It's interesting. I'd kind of like to lead a giga church, which is 10,000 people on an average weekend. You know, we're less than half of that right now. But I'm like, that'd be kind of neat. I'd be like, see, like, what's that about? So it's not like I don't have accomplishments that I'm interested in. I'd love to impact that many people for Jesus. But more and more I find myself, even if I get there, that's not the legacy. And I wonder how much that's an age thing. As you age and you do accomplish things or you don't and you realize they don't matter that much. But I think as you age, you begin to recognize that the accomplishments are not what it's about, but the younger generation is still thinking more about that. And so I think a lot of our culture is driven by the younger generation, especially in our media and social media saturated things. So I wonder if the way our culture thinks about legacy is in part just a product of the fact that a lot of our culture is driven by younger people who haven't quite figured that out yet. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that's super interesting. I was thinking about it this weekend too, because you were talking about how you want to be remembered as being kind. And when Emily and I had Reese, who's our little 4-year-old right now, we said if he grows up to do anything in this whole world, we hope he loves Jesus and he's kind to others. And I really like this point you just brought up, because I think as young people, you kind of, you're raised by your parents and you go off on your own. So you have this kind of first standalone point is, the first time you've kind of thought about yourself on your own and what you can do and all these different things. And then perhaps you get married and this kind of like idea of self gets divided outside of your central kind of perspective. And then you have kids after that, possibly. And then that gets further divided. And I'm wondering too, if your sense and vision of accomplishment is also divided by how intertwined you get in these relationships as you start growing up as well. So
That's really good.
I really like thinking about that, because, when you're young and you're hungry and you're starting off in your job and you're getting your PhD and all these different things, you're thinking about like, what can I do moving forward? And then you get married and it's like, what can my wife and I do? Or how can I serve her? How can I invest in her moving forward, or him, if you're a woman getting married to a man, and then you have kids and how can we leave a legacy for them? And how can we raise them to leave the legacy that we want to see? So I think it's this really cool look at intergenerational kind of, I don't know how to define that. It's you're looking outside of yourself.
Yeah, I know. I'm really glad you said that. I do think that's a powerful insight. I think probably when you're right, when you first get out into the world, right, and you're sort of on your own, there's a small season where you're like, yeah, it kind of is all about me. And I even remember like the first time that I was living on my own, and I realized if I want to buy a candy bar, I can just buy a candy bar and eat it. Because growing up, like I had to ask mom and dad, and then they sort of made those calls. And then, like I was in high school, but I was out driving by myself. I was like, I have money in my pocket. I'm at the store by myself. If I want a Snickers bar, I can just get one. But that's sort of emblematic of that stage of life, right? It's very natural to think about what can I do and the freedom that I have, those kinds of things. But then you're right, you get married and suddenly you're entwined. I love that phrase you use. You're entwined in relationships where more and more your sense of identity, but also significance and are things going well, is tied up in actually the way I'm impacting somebody else and how we're doing together, and not just by because if your wife's not doing well, you're not doing well, right? It might not be your fault that she's not doing well, but you are not doing as well as you would be. Yeah, well, sometimes it is, but we're going to leave those aside for the moment, right? Yeah, if she's not doing well, then I'm not doing it, and vice versa. Like, I hate, sometimes I don't want to tell my wife that I'm not doing well because I know it's going to bring her down, because there is that entwining. And then you add kids, and now I don't think it's divided. I think it's a multiplication of entwining. Yeah, and so the more that your relationships become central to life and how things are going, the less you probably think about personal accomplishments as being the legacy. I think maybe it's just a natural evolution of that entwining in relationships.
Which is really cool, which is directly tied to most of the time with you kind of getting older. I know Francis Chan's got this model where he talks about when you and your wife are kind of in this triangular model, you're both pursuing Jesus together. You guys are inevitably getting closer together. So I was thinking about that analogy this weekend where you and your wife are both pursuing this legacy together. You are inevitably getting closer because you're both marching towards the same goal. Do you and Coletta kind of feel that a little bit kind of throughout your stages of marriage and raising kids, where when you guys are pursuing the same thing together, you guys are closer?
Yeah, and we have always told people when we've done premarital counseling with couples, we've always told them one of the most important things you can do is figure out some way to serve God together. Serving God is actually critical, but serving God together to some extent really is critical, because Francis might have popularized it, but I remember hearing it all the way back in like college before Francis Chan was
as
a
Francis
thing.
always says.
Right. Yeah, that if you're pursuing God together, you're actually getting closer to each other. But having that thing you're pursuing together being something of meaning and significance makes the drawing closer that much more powerful, right? If our goal is we're going to buy that house, well, there's probably some drawing together, but not like I'm pursuing Jesus together or pursuing kingdom impact together. There is a deepening of the entwining at that point. So yeah, we've definitely seen that.
That's awesome. I want to ask you something specifically about you and Colette as well that I thought was really interesting, just because I've gotten to know you and Colette over the years. You guys are both highly intelligent people who are not afraid to let your opinions be known, and not in a bad way. I really respect it. But you, one of the seeds of good relationships that you kind of talked about at the end here was not be slow to pick fights. And you mentioned that you are sometimes often quicker to pick fights, but I would mention that's because you desire kind of an intellectual sparring partner rather than trying to sometimes try to play devil's advocate a little bit here, but you really enjoy hearing the other perspective and like working through a problem. How do you approach that good-naturedly with Coletta? How have you learned how to do that? I'm sure that's been a process over the course of many, many years and how to attack that well.
And I would say we still are learning it. We're not there yet. And I think you're right. It's partly because we're probably both pretty intense personalities. Neither one of us is inherently wired to just go, hey, whatever you want, right? I was actually talking to somebody this weekend, but they were asking something political, and I was saying, listen, a lot of times I don't deal with the political, and it's not because I don't have opinions. And the person goes, yeah, I know, you've got plenty of opinions. It's like, I'm not sure how that came across, but okay.
Thank
you.
You.
That's true. I have opinions. Coletta has opinions. And sometimes the strength of those opinions can be really good, because we're it's the iron sharpens iron kind of a thing. Like we're like, oh, that's a bad opinion because you missed this. I'm like, oh, that's right. I would rather be right. I've always tried to figure out how to say this. I would rather be correct than right, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I really want to be correct. I want to be thinking correctly, and I'm going to assume that I'm thinking correctly to start with, but I would much rather like spar and debate this and find out that I was thinking incorrectly so that I can fix it. And I think she's wired the same way. And so sometimes we have these sparring things that are really good natured and they're excellent, but sometimes we get personally invested in whatever we're thinking and it doesn't go well. We sort of did preaching together for Mother's Day, and I'll just pull back the curtain and go like, sometimes people will go, well, you guys should do more of that. And we're like, no, we shouldn't, because doing it is great. Getting to it is hard. Like the process of figuring out how are we going to approach this and what are we going to say, and no, don't say that, you should say this, but what about this? Like our feelings almost always get hurt, and it just, we constantly were like, this is so much harder than it should be. It's worth it, but it's harder than it should be, which is to say, like, we're still in process on this. But I will say the number one key is what we talked about this week. It is humility. It is going, hey, I actually think this, but it doesn't matter that much. Like valuing your idea or like giving you a spotlight or giving you a chance to do this, or that actually matters more. And that's what humility is. It actually doesn't mean that I don't think I'm right. Like, it's not about ability or correctness. Humility has nothing to do with that. Humility doesn't say, oh, I think I'm probably wrong. Humility says, me being right here doesn't matter as much as being righteous and loving and being considerate and moving this thing together. So when I can remember to be humble, those sparring things are sparring things rather than conflict things. And when I don't remember to be humble, they become genuine conflicts that didn't need to be there. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that is the one thing that I keep learning, and I still have progress to make on.
No, I think that's really good to keep in mind too, especially when I really like the being correct versus being right, because a lot of the time, us as Christians, we have truth to speak into people's lives. So sometimes we get into these debates where we have to keep the relationship at the forefront of our mind and why we're having these debates with people. You know, we're not trying to hammer something down their throat and ruin the relationship. So I like how you had stated that humility comes into play into that, where it's this pursuit of the relationship with the person that, you know, Jesus has created and loved, rather than being right in the situation, because that can come at a detriment sometimes.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a really tough balance.
it is a tough balance, because I think it's, in some ways, sometimes we're splitting hairs between
Sure.
right and correct. You know, what I mean by it is, like, I want what I believe to be accurate. What I believe about God and about the world to be accurate, and in that sense, correct. But sometimes the pursuit of being right is more about convincing you that I'm correct than it is about just like speaking the facts. Like, I gotta win you over. I gotta sell this one. And that's a little different than just being correct. I mean, this is probably a quick deep dive here, but you know, I'm lots of conversations over the last couple of years with families that are wrestling with some of the transgender kind of stuff, you know, and like my kid wants to transition or become a different gender, and I'm like, okay, this is tricky, because there's correct and then there's right. And correct is, I think it's pretty clear. God made male and female. I mean, it's a biological thing, and it's a very biblical thing. But it's not being approached from the person who is wrestling with their gender identity. They're not coming at it from a technical, what is correct, what is right. It's what am I feeling and what am I wrestling and struggling. And that becomes a much more complicated conversation. And one of the things that I'm trying to help parents understand when they come to me is, hey, maintaining the relationship is your number one priority here. Because the chances are the circumstances that are leading to the wrestling, those are going to change over time. And you want to still be the safe place for them to come back to as they change opinions or wrestling or as their circumstances. It's just a really messy thing, right? And so a lot of times I'll get a couple that'll come to me and they'll go, well, you know, she is coming at it from like, this is correct, and I got to make sure that they know that I'm right. And maybe he sometimes, or vice versa, is going, like, yes, there is correct biblical thinking about this and biological thinking about this, but there's a relationship here, and maintaining that relationship is really important over the long haul. And so how do we hold to what's correct, what's true, but also maintain a relationship so that when things change, they can still come to us. We haven't lost that. That's a really complicated thing, but I think that's at the heart of what I'm trying to get at about correct versus right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like your point there too. Emily and I always talk about when Reese gets in trouble later in life, we want him to go, oh no, I'm in trouble, I need to call mom and dad, rather than I'm in trouble, mom and dad can't find out. So I
Right.
like the differentiation between that too, by keeping that relationship in a really healthy place.
Yeah.
I think that's super important too, because I feel like different parenting styles come into play and everything like that, but you always want to be a safe refuge for your kids.
Yeah. And it's messy. I mean, you know, and I think the Christian community is wrestling with the mess of it right now, because again, I mean, just to be very clear, like, the Bible's clear, and I think biology is also pretty clear. But at the end of the day, it's relationship, and how do you maintain relationship in a way that doesn't deny what's correct, but also keeps the door open for continued conversations? Like, I can say what's correct biblically in a way that shuts the door on relationship, but that person's never coming back to me. But at the same time, I don't want to leave the door open under false pretenses, you know? Like, I'm not going to deny what's true in order to maintain the relationship, because that ultimately isn't kind. And then they come back and they feel betrayed. Like, well, you know, you maintain relationships, so I thought you were on board with this. Well, I don't want to have a relationship under false pretenses, so I have to hold to what's true. But can I do it in a way that's kind and leaves the door open for a relationship even when we disagree? And like, doing that in the midst of it is really messy, right? And not just the gender stuff. I mean, that's like every relationship is like that. You know, Claudia and I vary in our opinions on a lot of different things. And so how do we work through that in a way that I'm sort of sticking to my guns, but I'm not using the guns on you? That's actually, I've never thought about it like that.
Hey,
but that's
there we
not,
go.
That'll probably preach, right?
There we go.
I'm sticking to my guns, but I'm not using the guns on you. That's, yeah.
There we go. I feel like that's going to be the YouTube title now. I've got it in my head. As we look kind of forward here to the next couple of weeks, I think one thing we were really intentional about in this series was how do we pursue a bunch of different relationships in a healthy way throughout this sermon series. So can you give us just like a sneak peek on what some of the relationships are that we're going to be looking into there? I know there's family you choose kind of coming up here. You talked about childing well, which I thought that was kind of a cool term that I hadn't really thought about too much before.
Yeah, so this next week we're going to talk about marriage. And then I think we've got a session on parenting. And then, like dealing with aging parents as a kid is in that mix. And then there's a mentoring. Mentoring maybe is too technical a word, but it's those relationships that we're pouring into somebody more than they're pouring into us. We're going to get something back from it, but we're pouring into them. I think I've heard a few people say, and I think this is right, we should always have relationships where we're looking up to them, and then relationships where we're looking down to them, and then relationships where I'm looking over to them, right? Those are the kinds of relationships we need in our lives. So we're going to kind of address all those.
That's going to be awesome, man. I'm really excited to see where this goes. Thank you so much for your time today, Craig. Again, the reason I'm going to be out next week, I just wanted a little bit of a preview, is we have sports camp here, which I'm really excited about. This is my 9th year head coaching flag football on campus here, which is super exciting. So we're going to have 850 plus kids on campus next week here at the Littleton campus with 400 plus serve team members-ish. So we're going to have like almost 1,300 people here next week for our version of a vacation Bible school. We call it sports camp though. So we have Jesus at the center of the messaging while we kind of like coach the kids up in different sports Monday through Thursday here. So we would love your prayers as we come into next week. It's wild. It is wild. It's one of my favorite weeks. I'm not like a big go work in the nursery on the weekends type of a guy, but sports camp is one of my favorite weeks that we do throughout the entire year. So I love that the legacy lens is overlapping with us pouring into all of these different people on campus here. I'm sure that was divine creation here.
I was not thinking about it at the time, but he knew. He
knew. So if you guys could be praying for our entire team here, that would be wonderful. And we'll see you guys next week.
God bless.
This podcast is hosted by Colin McFarland along with Craig Smith. We are mixed, edited, and produced by Zach Anderson. Our creative director is Colin McFarland. Maddie Brower is our SEO and copy specialist. The Continuing the Conversation feed is part of the Mission Hills Podcast Network in Littleton, Colorado, and available for download wherever you get your audio and video podcasts. Thanks for listening.